The Amazon rainforest looks solid from above, a single endless carpet of green stretching to the horizon. But beneath that living ocean, under the vines, the roots, and the fog, there are scars, lines too straight to be made by chance, circles too perfect for the forest to have drawn by itself. Hidden roads, silent plazas, and the ghostly outlines of cities that for centuries no one believed could exist. For a long time the Amazon was described as a green desert, a place too poor in nutrients, too harsh, too unforgiving to support large, complex societies. Textbooks repeated the same idea. Scattered groups, small villages, no great cities, no monumental civilizations like those of the Andes or Mesoamerica. The jungle, they said, was simply too much. But the forest remembers differently. Old chronicles, written by shaken European explorers, staggering back from the rivers, spoke of vast towns along the banks, of causeways crossing floodplains, of fields that stretched farther than they could see. For centuries, these reports were dismissed as exaggerations, fantasies from men lost in fever and fear. Yet satellite images, LiDAR surveys, and quiet work from archaeologists on muddy riverbanks have begun to confirm something astonishing. The Amazon once held dense networks of people, intricate earthworks, and perhaps entire urban landscapes erased by time and the relentless growth of the jungle. This story begins where those clues end. It starts with what we know, and then walks into the part we still don't, into the unknown dark beneath the leaves. My name is Daniel, and when I boarded the small propeller plane bound for Manaus, I thought I was joining just another academic expedition. I was wrong. The plane shuddered as we broke through a layer of cloud, dropping suddenly before catching itself. Through the scratched window, the Amazon revealed itself, rivers like polished bronze, winding and splitting, the forest pressing in on all sides. From this height, you can't see the insects, the thorns, or the mud that pulls at your boots. All you see is the scale, an expanse so huge that even in the 21st century, large pieces of it remain only vaguely mapped. Tens of thousands of square kilometers where no one has walked in modern times, where the only paths belong to animals and the people who have always lived here. Waiting for me at the airport was the rest of the team. There was Anna, a Brazilian archaeologist whose work on ancient Amazonian earthworks had made her something of a quiet legend. Short, sharp-eyed, with hair constantly escaping whatever attempt she'd made to tie it back, she looked more like a field guide than a professor. Her backpack seemed to weigh as much as she did. Next was Lucas, an expert in remote sensing. He could stare at a fuzzy satellite image and tell you which blur was a hill, which was an old river channel, and which was a ditch dug by human hands centuries ago. Thick glasses, eternally smudged, always holding onto a laptop like a life raft. There was also Nayara, an indigenous guide from a community upriver who had worked with visiting scientists for years and walked through this forest with the calm confidence of someone at home. Soft-spoken, observant, she seemed to notice everything. Birds, shifting river currents, clouds building in the distance. And then there was me, with my notebooks and voice recorder, thinking I was simply there to document their work. We gathered that first evening in a small hotel near the port. The air smelled of the river, muddy and humid. Ceaseless traffic noise mixed with the cries of nightbirds perched on streetlights. Anna spread a series of printed images across the table. "This," she said, tapping a grainy, almost abstract pattern of light and shadow, "is why we're here." At first, the picture meant nothing to me. It looked like someone had taken a photo of crumpled paper. But Anna rotated it, and suddenly I saw it. A ring. A nearly perfect circle, about 200 meters across, darker than the forest around it. From the circle, faint lines radiated outward, almost parallel, like spokes. "This is LiDAR data from a remote survey," she said, Most of this region has never been properly explored on the ground, but when we strip away the vegetation from the data, the ground surface appears. And what we see are geometric earthworks, circles, squares, rectangles, and lines that do not occur naturally. They're made by people. Lucas slid his laptop forward. Not just one site, he said, a network, here, here, and here. He pointed to multiple glowing shapes scattered across a virtual map of green and brown. Dozens of promising anomalies, some of them connected by elevated paths, probably causeways to move through flooded terrain. We've confirmed features like these in other regions. Villages, ring ditches, raised fields, but this cluster deep between these tributaries, he zoomed in, it's different, denser, more complex. What's it called? I asked. Officially? Just a grid reference, he said. But some of the communities upriver have a name for that region. Nayara? She nodded slowly. We call it the place of the Encoberta, she said. The hidden one. Some say there is a city there that closed itself from the world. Some say the forest swallowed it. I could feel a shiver under my tiredness. And you think it's real? Nayara looked at me, then at the map. The forest does not keep empty stories, she said. 2 days later, we were on the river. The boat was long and narrow, painted a peeling blue. The engine roared like an angry wasp, leaving a churning wake behind us. Hammocks swung under the tin roof, and the atmosphere smelled of gasoline, wet wood, and boiled coffee. The city fell away quickly. Concrete turned to wooden houses on stilts, then to occasional villages tucked along the banks, then just trees and water and sky. During the day, the heat pressed against us like a solid weight. At night, the forest sang, a booming chorus of frogs, the high clicks of insects, distant roars that may have been thunder or something alive. The stars were bright when clouds allowed it. The Southern Cross hung low and familiar. As we pushed deeper, Lucas spent his time staring at a tablet, checking our GPS coordinates against his maps. We're heading into a gap, he said more than once. Almost no high-resolution imaging. Too many clouds during the last passes. The LiDAR scan that showed the circle, those were lucky breaks in the clouds. Anna spent her days carefully cataloguing every sign of ancient presence. A shard of pottery turned up on a riverbank, a patch of unnaturally dark soil, terra preta, human-made black earth, rich and fertile, that hinted at centuries of cultivation. At some sites, she told me, this black earth runs meters deep. It doesn't form by itself. People made it, layer by layer, year after year. That alone tells us there were dense, stable communities here long before anyone crossed the ocean from Europe. So why don't we see big ruins? I asked. Stone temples, walls, cities like in the Andes. She smiled tiredly. Because the people here worked mostly with wood, earth, and living things. They built with what the forest gave them, and the forest took it back. Imagine a city of hardwood houses, towering platforms, bridges of woven lianas, ceremonial plazas defined by carved posts. Leave it alone for 500 years, in a climate where everything rots, where trees grow as if in fast forward. The stone we find are tools, sometimes carvings, but the architecture, it becomes soil, nutrients, memories. And yet, Lucas chimed in, not looking up from his screen, the earth remembers the cuts, the ditches, the mounds, the straight lines no storm can draw. At night, as the boat rocked gently and the engine finally quieted, Nayara told stories. She spoke of the Curupira, the guardian of the forest with backward feet, who confuses those who walk without respect. Of the Cobra Grande, the great serpent that curls beneath the rivers, measuring their depths, and of the Encoberta, the hidden city. In some stories, she said, eyes reflecting the firelight from our small stove, it is a city of bright people. Not bright like the sun, but bright like knowledge. They learned how to live with the river's moods. They called the fish, directed the floodwaters, grew gardens in the sky on woven platforms. They were powerful, and the more they learned, the more they wanted. The forest speaks softly, but they spoke loudly, louder than the trees, louder than the animals. In some tellings, the forest warned them, but they did not listen. So one day the forest closed. Roots grew over their paths. The city dimmed. Only those the forest accepts can still find it. "And you believe that?" I asked. She shrugged. "I believe the forest talks, and I believe that when people do not listen, the forest remembers." Stories like this are ways we tell each other, be careful. Whether the city exists as people imagine it, that is another question. After several days, the main river narrowed, and we turned into a tributary that snaked deeper into the unknown. The maps on Lucas's screen grew less detailed, the lines fainter. "We're leaving the usual paths," he said. We switched from the big boat to smaller canoes, loading equipment carefully. GPS units, solar panels, LiDAR drones packed in foam, sample bags, notebooks, cameras, enough food to last weeks, and the lightweight tents that we hoped would keep at least some insects out. The air under the canopy was thicker somehow, the light green and filtered. Our paddles dipped silently into the dark water. The forest grew around us like a cathedral, trunks as pillars, branches arching overhead, vines draped like curtains. We passed under trees where monkeys watched us sleepily, where macaws flashed red and blue between branches. Sometimes the silence broke with the crashing of something large, moving away from the riverbank unseen. Days blurred into a rhythm: paddle, walk, stop, record, dig, paddle again. We set up a base camp on a slightly elevated area, safe from the more ordinary floods of the river, and from there we began our forays inland. The ground was rarely truly solid. In some places our boots sank into moss and leaf litter, in others into sucking mud that tried to keep our feet. Hidden roots waited to catch ankles. Clouds of mosquitoes gathered at every pause, whining like tiny engines. Sweat never fully dried. Yet even in that chaos, patterns emerged. One morning, after following a barely visible animal trail, Anna called us over. She stood at the edge of a shallow ditch, half filled with leaves and water. "Look," she said, "see how straight this is." The ditch ran in a line that was almost unnaturally precise, cutting through the forest for dozens of meters until it disappeared behind trees. Parallel to it, several meters away, was another. Lucas checked his GPS. "This matches one of the linear features from the LiDAR," he said. "We're standing on one of the spokes from the circle." We followed the ditch. It rose slightly as it progressed, forming a low embankment on one side. At its highest point, the ground felt firmer, drier. Through the trees ahead, I thought I saw a hint of open space. And then we stepped into it. The clearing was not truly clear. Small trees and shrubs had reclaimed the space, but the canopy overhead was broken, allowing more light in. Underfoot, the ground sloped subtly down toward the center, where water collected in a shallow depression. Walking its perimeter, we traced a circle, not perfect like a modern survey, but regular enough to set it apart from natural terrain. "Ring ditch," Anna said softly. "A big one." We paced it out, measuring with our steps, then with tapes. 200 meters across, more or less. Small rises along the circumference suggested where posts or walls once stood. On the slightly elevated ring, the soil was darker, richer. Naira crouched, sifting through it with practiced hands, and soon held up a shard of pottery, the curve of it fitting neatly into her palm. "Not a natural pond," Lucas murmured. "This was engineered space. Maybe a village, maybe ceremonial. Connected to other sites by those linear ditches. We're standing inside what used to be a structure of meaning." We repeated that process for days. Circle after circle, some small, some large, a few squares. Rectangles positioned at strange angles to the surrounding terrain. Raised fields in low areas, visible by subtle changes in vegetation and slight ridges underfoot. In some spots, we found terraces along slopes with darker soil piled against them. 2 or 3 times we stumbled across more pottery, a stone axe head, burned clay that might once have formed part of a structure. At every new hint, Anna's face lit up with a mix of excitement and exhaustion. People lived here, she kept saying. Families, children, stories. Maybe thousands of them over centuries, not a wasteland, a landscape of people, and we've only walked through a tiny patch. Still, the circle that had brought us here eluded us. According to their maps, the most complex pattern, several overlapping ring ditches and lines, lay several kilometers deeper into the forest, beyond a series of swampy depressions. Reaching it meant leaving the relative safety of our base camp for an extended trek. We prepared carefully, extra water filters, spare batteries for equipment, lightweight food, emergency beacons. The weight of it all settled onto our backs and shoulders. The air felt heavier too, as if the forest sensed our intent. The day we set out, the sky was already muttering with distant thunder. "Rainy season is not fully here yet," Nyara said, looking up. "But in this region, storms grow fast. We move, we watch the sky, and if it speaks too loudly, we listen." For hours, we wove between trees, the ground alternately solid and treacherous. The further we walked, the less evidence there was of other human presence. Not even the old signs of loggers or hunters we sometimes passed closer to the river. The animal trails grew narrower, the calls of birds sharper, more insistent. Around midday, we reached the first swamp. The forest opened into a flooded plain, dotted with tree trunks rising out of still, tea-colored water. The air smelled of rot and life. Dragonflies flickered like shards of colored glass. "We cross here," Nyara said. "There's no going around without losing a day." We strapped our boots and shifted the weight on our backs. The water was lukewarm, rising quickly from ankles to knees, then to thighs. Each step sank into soft, unseen mud. In places, submerged roots offered unexpected support. In others, they twisted our feet. Twice, I wobbled dangerously, saved only by a quick grab from Lucas or a nearby tree. By the time we reached firmer ground on the far side, my clothes were soaked, my legs shaking. We rested briefly, drinking water, catching our breath. Above us, the clouds had thickened, the light dimmed to a muted green-tinged grey. "We should hurry," Anna said. "We're close." The forest agreed that we were close, or at least that's how it felt. There was a stillness now, a kind of attentive silence between the usual sounds. Even the insects seemed to hush every few minutes, as if listening. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the trees. The thunder that followed was not distant anymore. We pushed on. The first sign that we had reached something different was the change in the ground. Instead of the slight dips and rises we had grown used to, the terrain suddenly stepped up, broad, gently sloping mounds beneath the leaf litter. Nyara stopped, pressing her hand to one of the rises. "This is not natural," she said. "The earth is piled here." We climbed onto it. At its crest, the forest opened again, more dramatically this time. The canopy above was broken by a wide, almost circular gap. Younger trees tried to fill it, but their crowns had not yet interlocked completely. Light poured in, brighter than it had been all day. We were standing on the rim of the main ring. It was larger than the others we had seen. Walking its curve, it seemed to go on, easily 300 meters across. From this elevated rim, the central area appeared as a wide, shallow bowl, its floor uneven with small mounds and depressions. "Look," Lucas said, pointing. "Lines radiating out from the center. Some are ditches, some raised paths, and there, intersecting rings. Multiple phases of construction, maybe." Anna's voice trembled slightly. "This is not just a village," she said. "This is a central place, maybe a kind of capital or ritual hub. This is big." We moved carefully down into the bowl. Up close, the lines became more apparent. Some were subtle ridges, others shallow trenches filled with darker soil. On a low mound near the center, tree roots had grown around something stonier than the surrounding earth. With difficulty, cutting away roots as gently as we could, we revealed a section of carved stone. Not a statue or a block like in the Andes, but a broad slab with shallow grooves etched into its surface, lines and spirals, intersecting in ways that suggested meaning rather than random scratches. "It's eroded," Anna said, tracing one spiral without touching it, but this was deliberate. A marker, maybe a map, maybe a story. We filmed everything, photographed every feature from multiple angles. Lucas launched a small drone, its quiet hum rising into the air as it flew above the trees. It began scanning in slow, deliberate passes, emitting pulses that would, when processed later, reveal the structure of the ground beneath the vegetation in exquisite detail. On his screen, a live preview image formed gradually in shades of green and grey. The ring appeared, crisp and clear. The radiating lines, secondary rings, rectangular enclosures nested within the larger circle. But what caught our attention was a long, straight line extending away from the ring, more pronounced than the others. It cut through the forest in a direction we had not come from, reaching toward a slightly elevated area, perhaps a kilometer away. "A causeway," Lucas said. "That's too straight to be anything else. Maybe connecting this central place to another important site." The thunder overhead growled louder. First raindrops began to fall, fat and warm, darkening the soil. "We don't have much time," Anna said. "We mark our coordinates, shelter the drone data, and then we follow that line as far as we can." "Today?" I asked, glancing at the increasingly angry sky. Nayara studied the clouds. "Short storm," she said after a heartbeat. "Heavy, but not yet the kind that floods everything. We can move if we are smart. The forest will be slippery." We hurried. The rain arrived like a curtain. One moment, stray drops. The next, a wall of water. The sound was deafening, drumming on leaves and our plastic rain covers. The ground turned slick underfoot. The air cooled slightly, but the humidity rose until it felt like walking through a warm fog. Following the causeway line was difficult. It was a low ridge in some places, a barely there change in slope in others, but once you tuned your body to it, you could feel it. A subtle firmness under the mud, a direction that held despite the chaos of roots and underbrush. As we walked, the forest changed. The trees grew more massive, their roots forming natural steps. Lianas hung thicker, some as big around as my arm. The undergrowth actually thinned a little in places, as if something in the soil or the light here was different. After what felt like much longer than an hour, but could not have been, we reached the elevated area the drone had hinted at. It was not a hill, exactly. More like a broad platform of earth, rising gently above the surrounding terrain. The causeway we followed led right up its flank, curving around to approach from what seemed to be the most gradual angle. At the top, the ground leveled out into a space that was surprisingly even. Here the trees were older still, huge trunks, bark furrowed and dark. Between them, the soil underfoot was sprinkled with broken pottery. Not just a shard here and there, but dozens, some with faint traces of red or black paint still visible. Some pieces bore incised patterns, zigzags, parallel lines, small stylized figures. "It's like walking on a broken floor," I murmured. "This could have been a central plaza," Anna said. "Surrounded by houses or ritual structures, maybe centuries of occupation, rebuilding, renewing." In the center of this elevated platform, partially embraced by the roots of an enormous tree, we found the stone. Unlike the eroded slab at the ring center, this was larger, cleaner. Time and water had worn its edges, but its surface was protected, shielded by the tree's roots, which arched around it like ribs. The stone faced west, toward where the dim sun now hid behind clouds. Its surface was carved, not deeply, not in the bold reliefs of some other ancient cultures, but in delicate, shallow grooves that traced shapes and figures. There were spirals, yes, but also what looked like rivers, long winding lines that split and rejoined. Near the top, a series of small circles clustered together, connected by straight strokes. Around these, wavy lines that might be plants or flames. We knelt around it in the warm rain, speechless for a moment. "It looks like a map," Lucas finally whispered. "Rivers, settlements, maybe fields or managed forests." Anna shook her head slowly. "Or a story, or both. Many cultures do not separate those things. If you live by the river, your stories are maps, and your maps are stories." "Can we read it?" I asked. "Not completely," she said. "We can compare with what we know of similar traditions elsewhere in the Amazon, with what indigenous elders tell us, with patterns of settlement we're discovering. But fully, probably not. And that's okay." Around the base of the stone, tucked into crevices, we found offerings, or what might once have been offerings, fragments of shaped clay. A few small stones, not native to this exact area, perhaps carried here from far away, and one piece of wood, improbably preserved by some quirk of microclimate, still bearing faint traces of carving, a stylized animal with a long tail. Nayara touched it gently, reverently. "People came here with intention," she said. "This was not casual. This place was chosen and shaped." As the rain began to ease, the forest slowly reclaiming its usual sounds, we set up a temporary shelter to protect the stone while we documented it as best we could. Photographs, 3D scans, rubbings on semi-transparent sheets. We marked its location carefully. As dusk approached, a soft, golden light filtered through the thinning clouds. The wet leaves glowed. Mist began to rise from the forest floor. We sat together, exhausted, on the edge of the platform, looking out through the trees. From this vantage point you could just glimpse the slope where the causeway descended, hinting at the unseen ring ditch in the distance. Beyond that, nothing but a sea of green. "It's strange," I said, voice low. "We're sitting in what was almost certainly part of a city, or at least a central hub in a network of settlements. Thousands of people might have lived within walking distance, and now it's just us and the forest." "That's how time works," Anna said softly. "But I don't think the word 'just' belongs here. The forest is not a blank, it's full of memory." "Why did they leave?" I asked. "The people who built this, did they vanish? Were they destroyed? Did they become someone else?" "There are many possibilities," Lucas said, pushing his glasses up. "Disease brought from outside centuries ago. Environmental changes, perhaps their management systems failed during a period of unusual climate. Conflicts, or they didn't vanish at all. They may have moved, merged with other groups, changed their ways. The descendants of the people who shaped this land could be living along some river right now, telling stories about ancestors who built cities the forest reclaimed." Nayara nodded. "We do not think of our ancestors as gone," she said. "We think of them as roots. You do not always see the roots, but they are there. Many people outside look at the forest and think there was nothing here before. That is not true. The forest you see has human roots. Many hands touched it, shaped it, talked to it." "Do you think this could be the Encoberta?" I asked her quietly. "The hidden city?" She smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of her lips. "Maybe one of them," she said. "Hidden does not always mean invisible. Sometimes it means not understood. Sometimes it means protected." We camped that night on the platform, carefully avoiding the carved stone and the densest scatter of shards. Our tents glowed faintly from within as we turned on small lamps. Beyond their thin walls, the forest pressed close, the sounds of insects and nocturnal animals ebbing and flowing in waves. Lying in my hammock, listening to the soft snores of the others, I tried to imagine the scene centuries ago. Perhaps there had been a plaza here, open to the sky, ringed by wooden structures on stilts, fires burning in clay-lined pits, children running across the packed earth, adults gathered around the carved stone, placing offerings, telling stories, negotiating alliances, planning harvests, rituals, journeys downriver. This platform, this ring, the network of ditches and raised fields, they were not isolated. They were part of a system, a way of living with the forest that we were only beginning to understand. A city here did not mean blocks of stone and choking smoke. It meant a mesh of villages and hubs, of managed forests and waterways, of sacred spaces and working fields, all woven into the rhythms of flood and drought. And somehow, that entire way of being had slipped from the record of the outside world, covered by vines and ignorance. The next day and the ones that followed were filled with work. We mapped as much as we could, taking measurements, collecting soil samples, carefully bagging a few diagnostic shards of pottery to bring back for analysis. Lucas flew multiple drone missions, building up a more detailed picture of the ground forms than any satellite could provide. On his screen, the ghost city emerged. Rings, lines, enclosures, terraces, causeways, all interconnected. "It's like a circuit board," he said in awe. "An organic, irregular circuit board, but still, a system." Anna was more cautious. "We must be careful with our metaphors," she said. "We see what we expect to see. Let's call it what we know, an intricate landscape of earthworks and occupation. Let's let the people who live nearby, the knowledge keepers, help us interpret it." In the evenings, we sat with Nayara and recorded her thoughts, her community's stories of ancient builders who knew how to summon fish, who planted trees in patterns that fed animals and people together, who could read the river's signs like text. "This place is not the only one," she reminded us. "The forest is big. Many such places still sleep. Some we know and do not talk about. Some we do not know, but the forest does. If you look only from the sky, you will see lines. If you walk only on the ground without listening, you will see trees. To understand, you must do both." On our last full day at the site, a decision weighed heavily over us. We had found something extraordinary, or perhaps more accurately, we had confirmed something extraordinary. That deep in this part of the Amazon, an extensive complex of earthworks and settlements existed, evidence of a large, organized population that engineered its landscape on a grand scale. Publishing detailed coordinates and maps would make academic careers. It would also almost certainly attract less welcome attention. Looters, illegal loggers, those who see the forest only as resources to be extracted. We sat together under the tree that embraced the carved stone, the air heavy with the sweet rot smell of fallen fruit and wet leaves. "We can't keep this entirely secret," Lucas said. "Science needs data. The world needs to know that the old idea of an untouched Amazon is wrong, that people were here in complex ways long before colonial powers arrived. That might help protect indigenous rights now. And yet," Anna countered, "if we reveal everything, exact locations, maps, access routes, we could be handing this place over to people who will destroy it for profit." "The forest already hides it," I said. "Even with coordinates, getting here is not trivial." "Not for us," Nayara said quietly. "But once something is on a map, it grows a shadow. Roads follow shadows, money follows roads, trouble follows money." We fell silent. Finally, Anna spoke. "Maybe the answer is in how we tell the story. We can publish the patterns, the evidence of complexity, the challenge to old assumptions, without drawing a red circle and writing 'treasure here.' We work with the communities. We let them lead decisions about access. We acknowledge that this is not just science, it is heritage, living heritage. And we remember," Nayara added, "that not all secrets are meant to be solved. Some are meant to remind us to be humble." We agreed. When we finally left the site, carrying memory cards full of data, notebooks dense with observations, and samples carefully wrapped. We took one last look at the carved stone. The late afternoon light caught on its faint grooves. For a moment, I imagined they glowed, as if the sun traced them. I thought of all the hours of human attention that had been poured into those lines. Hands carving meaning into stone, feet treading paths on causeways now covered by roots, voices raised in languages no longer heard in this exact form, but perhaps still echoing in others. Back at the river, the world felt more familiar, though changed. When we finally returned to Manaus, the city's lights glittering across the water, the noise of traffic and music and human density felt almost overwhelming. Yet, in my mind, I still saw the ghostly map of the earthworks overlaid on the modern satellite image. The idea that beneath what we think we know lies an entire other layer of history, half buried, half erased, but not gone. In the months that followed, as Anna and Lucas processed the data, as papers were drafted with careful, measured language, as maps were drawn that zoomed out to show patterns rather than pinpointed X's, the story of the Amazon's lost cities began to shift in my own mind. Maybe the phrase "lost city" is not quite right. The cities are not lost. We are. Lost in our assumptions, lost in the arrogance that says if something leaves no stone tower or metal monument, it never existed. Lost in the comfort of believing vast places were empty before we arrived. What we saw out there, deep in the forest, was not a fantasy of golden streets or crystal pyramids. It was something far more real and more important. Proof that the Amazon was and is a domesticated forest, a partner in a relationship with people that stretches back millennia. The civilians not yet found, as some might call them, are not necessarily vanished, but transformed, their descendants living quietly along other rivers, under other names, still listening to the forest's voice. Even today, as you look at satellite images of the Amazon, countless patches of it remain faint, unexplored. Clouds pass overhead, covering the land during crucial scans. Entire regions have never been surveyed with LiDAR. There are surely more ring ditches, more causeways, more platforms with carved stones, hidden under layers of green. Somewhere right now, rain is falling on another earthwork unseen by any outsider. Somewhere, the roots of a towering tree are wrapping themselves gently around a carved stone, set upright centuries ago by hands that shook slightly with effort, or reverence, or both. The Amazon's true history is not a single city to be discovered like a prize. It is a tapestry of countless settlements, networks, and cultures, many of them still nameless to us. Each one a reminder that the forest is not an enemy to be conquered, nor a museum to be admired from a distance, but a living record. A book still being written, whose early chapters we are only now beginning to decipher. One night, long after our expedition, I dreamt of the platform again. In the dream, the trees around the carved stone were young. The plaza was filled with people, talking, laughing, working. Children darted between adults, chasing each other. Smoke rose from controlled fires. Someone placed a fresh offering at the base of the stone. A small clay figure, carefully shaped, eyes wide. The figure looked strangely familiar. I woke with the echo of a thought. We are not the first to stand at the edge of what we do not understand and try to make sense of it. And we will not be the last. As long as there are minds to wonder and forests to remember, the story of the Amazon's hidden cities will never truly end. It will only grow richer, more complex, as we learn to see not just the green from above, but the lines beneath it. And somewhere, deep in the shade where sunlight filters down in thin golden beams, a city that closed itself from the world still waits, not to be conquered, but to be listened to.